in '64, when I came over as a student, America was deeply Christian. I came back in '91, having taught in the south of France for 18 years, in godless France, actually, a very secular culture. I was struck that America was just as spiritual, but it was changing religions. And the religion that I was noticing was the New Age movement, as it was called.
My name is Stephen Bankars, and I am a former New Age blogger who is now active in Christian apologetics ministry. I grew up in a Christian household my whole life. I was homeschooled under a Christian curriculum, was in and out of Christian private school, constantly in and out of church. We had church services at my house for a while, and to me, I was extremely familiar with the faith, with Christianity. I believed it passively. I didn't have an active relationship with God, or with Jesus for that matter.
Stephen was raised in a Christian family. He was dedicated when he was a baby to the Lord. Mike and I went to church regularly. I homeschooled our boys and very much enjoyed teaching Stephen the Bible stories. Mike would always read Bible stories to the boys at bedtime. It was just an honor, really, to train up our children in the way that they should go, and our hope is always that they won't depart from what they were taught.
So what started to peel me away from a biblical worldview was this program on the History Channel called Ancient Aliens and Ancient Astronaut Theory. So it's essentially this position that mankind was visited in the past by extraterrestrials who ancient man mistook for being gods descending down from the heavenlies. And for me, it started off as a relatively innocent curiosity about the nature of aliens and alleged alien abductions and visitations. And then you start researching a little bit more, and you realize that this is intrinsically connected to a completely different theology, a completely different model of spirituality, of human history. The new spiritual movement puts man in the place of God, in the sense that New Ageism defines God as being the ultimate underlying substance of reality. And so since he's underlying everything, and since he's the substance of reality itself, he's the substance of me. He's my ultimate identity. In new spirituality, I was told was God. And so what could be more meaningful than being told that you, in your highest identity, you're the creator experiencing himself as a person and living through this avatar of a human, but really it's God kind of going through a play to evolve his own consciousness and to learn new things about himself. And so it literally puts man in the place of God, calls him God, and then gives him the right to live and think any way he wants, with no accountability, with no judgment, no condemnation. And you are basically seated in the seat of God at that point.
So the heart is really what arises when the mind subsides and presence arises. And as presence arises, you look upon other human beings or other life forms and no longer feel this absolute separateness between you and them, because the separateness is created by conceptualizing other humans.
It's a very powerful notion that's taking over. It's the ability to express yourself, and it's your right to be who you are as a human being, and that's religiously or sexually or whatever. The new view of humanity is to be your creative self and realize that you are part of this creation which we really worship. And so an individual really becomes the center of his own life. Now, I call it oneism because it's a system that will only admit to one kind of reality. We're all divine, really. We're divine in many ways. Some people hug trees because they want to say that nature is divine and so trees are divine. Or we are divine. You go within to discover your inner self, and you have out-of-body experiences that confirm that you are divine. But this is a whole variety of ways of discovering that all is one, that we're all divine, and there's only one reality. So I call that oneism. Now, what Paul says, he opposes that, or compares that to the other way of being a human being, which is worship of the Creator.
So in Hinduism, you may say all animals are divine, but some are more divine than others. There are a lot of paradoxes in Hinduism. All is divine. You have pantheism, pan from Greek meaning all, theos meaning God, all is God. Yet you have the gods. So if all is divine, therefore all human beings should be divine. Yet the Brahmins are divine. The moment a Brahmin is born, he is royal and divine. The Brahmin can be worshipped. He can be prayed to. And they worship my father and my grandfather. And as a young Brahmin, I remember people bowing at my feet and bringing their offerings and their gifts to me and seeking my blessing. My father was like this god. Hindus considered him an avatar and worshipped him. An avatar is a god who has come back to earth. There are many avatars in Hinduism, unlike in Christianity, where there is one incarnation.
My spiritual journey really started when I was rather young. And although I was being exposed to Christianity in terms of my mother taking my sister and myself to various churches, and actually thought of myself as a Christian when I was a teenager, I began to question things about Christianity. The Bible for me was not God's word. It was a book somehow written that was kind of about God and Jesus, but I didn't really take it as something that was authentic. And so I began to question the truths of Christianity. I began to question, why did Jesus die on the cross? I didn't understand. I was interested in other religions. In high school, I had friends who had other religions, and that made me curious, and I began to think, why do I have to call myself a Christian? Why am I not allowed to explore other belief systems? So when I got to college, I actually, of course, I had to work and study for my classes, but when I could, I was reading other things, and when I did a project on Gandhi, I got very interested in Hinduism and Eastern religions. And so Eastern religions became a very strong interest then, as well as the paranormal or the supernatural. I had a natural interest in that for some reason, I'm not sure why, but I had some experiences, and the experiences validated my belief that there was a spiritual world out there we couldn't see, but that maybe we could somehow learn about and even manipulate. And so that was the part of the supernatural that intrigued me. I learned meditation, and I learned about interpreting dreams. I learned about psychic healing. And in the meditation, we were introduced to our spiritual master. Spiritual master is a disembodied spirit that we were told would be with us for the rest of our life. And after that happened, it's like things really accelerated, and I got involved for a while with Tibetan Buddhism, and I learned how to do Tibetan Buddhist meditation. Then I got involved with Zen Buddhism. And Zen Buddhism, I did mindfulness meditation for 12 years. And during that time is when I also studied astrology and became an astrologer. And of course, after becoming an astrologer, I kept my Eastern religious views. And it was really sort of a mishmash of Zen Buddhism and Hinduism, and they were sort of combined, which is typical in that kind of spiritual path. And I had those views and the astrological views, and they were all very compatible. And that was my spiritual path. That's what I followed for many years.
What motivated me to start sharing this stuff online, I had a younger brother who his friends would always ask me stuff pertaining to, spirituality or the afterlife, reincarnation, and I wanted to put together a Facebook page for this material. And as I was sharing it there, other people were finding my page, and it started growing, started networking with other admins from other pages, and before you know it, you're up at 100,000 Facebook likes, 200,000, and then I reached 500,000. It was extremely exciting. It was extremely rewarding. I was making tens of thousands of dollars a month off this website. I had connections to the moon and back, and I thought that it was all God-given. I actually, when I bought my sports car, after I launched my website, the verse that was replaying in my head was, "Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added to you" as well. I was completely deluded, but I believed that God wanted me sharing these things because of my success. I thought that was His approval on my life, and I had this idol in my head of who God was that I was praying to. And the entire way New Spirituality is carried out in reference to knowledge, it's through feelings, it's through picking something, creating your own system of reality that quote unquote resonates with you, that feels good to you, that agrees with your intuition. And this ties back into the idea that we are all ultimately the creator temporarily experiencing himself in the form of a person. And so all of these different things, they're ultimately just different plays in consciousness. They're just different thought forms, different ways of the creator experiencing reality. And so it doesn't really matter in this worldview whether or not your thoughts correspond to truth. In the end, experience is what matters.
There is a force, energy, consciousness, divine thread, I believe, that connects all spiritually to all of us, to something greater than ourselves. Now, if you're living in the space of an open heart, you have a blessed life. Anybody know what I'm talking about? If you are living in the space of an open heart, you have a blessed life. And I believe that there is no life without a spiritual life. I want to say that again. There is no life without a spiritual life, because we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. So are you ready to open your heart?
Obviously, the church is always open to the culture, and for the good reason of wanting to know what the culture is doing and to speak to it. But sometimes in doing that, we wonder if the culture doesn't have some good things to tell us that we can use. And I think some of the spiritual techniques of this new spirituality have been adopted by certain Christians as a way of getting closer to Jesus. But the Enneagram and the labyrinth and centering prayer and all these classic pagan ways of being spiritual are now being used in the Christian church. And I'm afraid the distinction between us and God, which those methodologies intend to eliminate, become thinner and thinner. I think we as Christians have to have a strong sense that God and the creation are distinct, God and us are distinct, and that's for the sake of a clear description and declaration of the gospel. We need to have that.
If you think about the way that new spirituality feeds into our culture, you can't go to any mainstream book chain in America without seeing a section devoted to new spirituality, to the New Age movement. You'll never see a metaphysical naturalist on Oprah Winfrey, but you'll see people like Deepak Chopra, people like Eckhart Tolle, and this is becoming extremely prevalent in every ordinary house. I believe new spirituality is a much greater threat to the faith of Christians and people who want to become Christians, because it's more pervasive, it's more easy to access, and it's more encouraged and glorified in our culture right now.
Eckhart Tolle got his teachings from a Hindu guru in India. When you read his writings, you could see that he is almost quoting verbatim the Hindu gurus and yogis. It is not some new Western brand of philosophy. It really is Hindu philosophy that he's promoting.
One of the things that really clicked for me after my encounter with Jesus is looking back on all the things that I had studied and seeing how carefully orchestrated everything was to explain away Christianity. It was all formulated against Christ. Everything from, popular books written by Eckhart Tolle to channeled material, to contact material. Everything seemed to go out of its way to account for the person of Jesus. But they never did this for Muhammad. They never did this for Buddha. And so that to me was a massive blinking red light. Like, oh my gosh, how come through all the books I've read, all the articles I've come across, they all seem to try to account for Jesus, yet none of them do it sufficiently. But he's the only person they try to account for.
Jesus lived as a man on earth and knew what we go through as human beings, and so can understand our pain and our sorrow. And it's somebody very real. It's not some kind of ethereal figure. And of course, one of the major differences is the resurrection, the bodily resurrection of Jesus. He's the only teacher of all these religious teachers who is still alive and who lives after death and is eternal.
Looking at all of the cultures that practice paganism, they all had things in common with one another. Every culture did, except for the Jews, except for the people of the Old Testament, the people of the Bible. They were very, very clearly set apart from the very beginning. They believed differently, they acted differently, and everyone else around them seemed to be believing the exact same things, using certain drugs to enhance spirituality and to go into the spirit world. Even things like child sacrifice. And yet you see in the Bible a people that is very set apart and unique and not tainted with the same moral flaws and spiritual error that you see in other cultures. And so the sanctification of the people in the Bible and the common themes in pagan cultures, that to me made me think, okay, like, these people actually were chosen by God, and he did reveal himself to one culture. That's why they're different.
I would simply say that I think we as Christians need to take very seriously the culture in which we live, to study this new spirituality and know what it is, what it's saying, get to know people who are involved in it, and then bring the good news of the gospel at the right moment to these kinds of folks, because at the end of the day they're going to need to hear the truth about the nature of existence and who God is.
Apologetics at its basic level is providing a reasoned answer to questions about and arguments against Christianity.
Students, when they get to university, are bombarded with every worldview except for the Christian worldview is not on the table in any of their classes or disciplines.
A lot of students are asking questions, students who grew up in church and students who haven't had exposure to Christianity, and they're thinking about, why am I here and what's life about?
Very much the university functions as the mind of the Western world, and there wasn't a credible voice that was engaging the campus with the Christian worldview. And so I believe that Ratio Christi is God's answer to helping us to engage and to help show that Christianity is a public truth that's defensible, that can compete in the marketplace of ideas for the mantle of truth.
We have to come to understand that knowledge is from God. I mean, all truth is God's truth.
Every Christian needs to know some apologetics so that we can all fulfill the Great Commission.
There was a need on the college campuses And God raised up Ratio Christi to fill that need.
So when you give support to Ratio Christi, you're giving them the type of resources that they absolutely need to have to share their faith with others.